in business development. Reba.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gina. All right. Hold on, technology. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists to the stage. Before I get started, I just wanted to say bienvenidos a todos de México. Perdón, pero mi español no está bueno. Entonces, ahora hablamos con inglés. Gracias. But welcome to this discussion about the cross-border panel on promoting expansion into Canada and Mexico. As your moderator, I am honored to be guiding you throughout this conversation. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Sophie Chen, who is currently serving as the director for the Asia Pacific at Invest Ottawa. Sophie has been the forefront of driving the economic development of opportunities in foreign direct investment attraction, trade, and innovation partnerships for Ottawa, the National Capital Region. Over the past 15 years, she has assumed various senior roles, including Senior Business Development Manager for Life Sciences and Director of Market Research at the Ottawa Centre for Research and Innovation. Sophie has also contributed her expertise as a board member and strategic advisor to numerous national and regional industrial and academic associations and institutions. Please welcome Sophie. Perfect. Next up, I would like to introduce Jack Hughes, Senior Vice President, Planning and Operations from Business Council of Canada. Jack manages the operations of the council, including strategic planning and liaises with the board of directors. Jack assists in the development of the council's policy priorities, the oversight of financial and human resources, as well as the membership development and event planning. Prior to joining the Business Council of Canada, Jack was a senior executive with a global public relations firm and previously was a lawyer of one of Canada's largest firms. Jack brings more than 20 years experience working in communications, public affairs, government, and the law with a particular focus on international trade policy. Thanks, Jack. Next up, I would like to introduce Alain Dudoit. I've been practicing that last name for the past couple of hours. Currently is a former ambassador of Canada, Serrano Visiting Fellow, and strategic advisor of our Global Advantage Consulting Group. Since his retirement from the Canadian Public Service in 2008, Alain is applying and sharing his vast international experience in innovation partnerships, public policies, his many professional achievements, and an impressive knowledge network in Canada and abroad. Alain. Last but not least, I would like to introduce José Luis de Alba, part of the delegation from the state of Jalisco in Mexico, serving as president and CEO for Incipio Ventures, a multifamily office that protects and manages the value of its partners in an investment fund. They are also venture builders with access to capital in support of startups and scale-up companies. José is also a chairman at InnoHub Mexico and chairman of the board of Carima Sistemas de Gestión. José? Perfect. All right, so I'll just jump on in. So with the economic ties between Mexico and Canada, there's been significant growth propelled by the agreements of USMA, the agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It's facilitated goods and services, but also industrial policies as well. So considering the dynamic landscape of international trade and economic cooperation, I think I'll jump to Alain for this question. What is the climate for the cross-border opportunities between Canada and Mexico, especially from an industrial policy perspective?
I think this question about industrial perspective should be addressed to my gentleman.
Sure. Let's go ahead.
No, I'm joking. I will be happy to bring part of the answer, but I'm going to tell you that the climate, I don't know if you have reviewed, as I did earlier this month, the different forecasts for year 2024 and beyond. And I must admit that it's very depressing. There is a convergence of forecasts, both from think tanks in Europe, US, Asia, Canada, Mexico. I've reviewed them all. The consensus is that this year is going to be annus horribilis. This is a Latin word for one of the worst years, a nightmare. For a number of reasons. Climate, first and foremost, AI perils and opportunities, but also the dangers of AI, the misuse, I should say, of AI. The other conflicts, conflicts in Europe, conflicts in the Middle East. And in fact, one think tank in the US, so it's not a Canadian think tank and it's not a Mexican think tank, the big elephant not in the room, predicted that the key risk for the global system, the number one risk, is the US. That's the first time in my career that a think tank is projecting the US, representing the US as a risk. So when you speak of climate, we have to keep this in mind. You have alluded to the USMCA or the US, yes, USMCA. Sometimes I spell it in the other sense. Okay. The USMCA, in terms of digital trade, has very impressive commitments by the three partners and offer great potential from in the business, in particular in digital trade. As you know, this USMCA is going to be reviewed in 2026, if my memory is correct, July 26. In the meantime, there will have been 3 elections, by the way, of the 3 amigos. If I start in chronological order, I think there is the Mexican election first in June, the American election in November, and we all follow what is, with much interest, what is not happening in the US, which is dangerous to all of us. And the last one, Canada, likely in 2025, unless there is a vote in Parliament. We have a minority government. So looking at climate and looking at the broad perspectives, we have a potential, a very huge potential in terms of North America trade market. We need to focus, and that's where I would like to bring a specificity and some. By the way, I've learned a lot from the discussions that have taken place before. We have spoken a lot about AI, and rightly so. Rightly so. I've not heard much said about data. Someone made a reference to data science, but AI without data is not AI. I mean, it's AI is the, if you want, is the power reactor. I see it as the power reactor, but the power reactor to function needs fuel, and fuel is data. And we have a critical problem in one critical area of our potential development from a business perspective. It's the supply chain. Supply chain management in North America is by and large completely fragmented and not very interoperable. So we must address, this is a critical issue. I would say this is a national security issue, priority, both for Canada, and we are focusing on this, the US and Mexico, but we are focusing on it, it seems, in a silo, the Canadian silo, the American silo, and the Mexican silo. I think opportunities like this raise the profile of the need to look at the supply chain as an integrated concept in the full respect of regulations, cultural specificities, political system of the three partners. But the supply chain, in a way, should not know any border. It should be fluid. It should be interoperable. And for this to be, well, we have to share and develop data. And we are not yet there. You know, if I focus on the Canadian experience as an example, government departments don't share data between themselves at the federal level. Don't share data enough, I would say. I'm focusing on supply chain, okay, at present. If I continue, federal government, provincial government don't share data enough on the supply chain. And what about Canada, US? Canada, US, Mexico. And so the issue there, and I'll come back to the fuel, the fluidity of data. There's a critical need to develop a smart supply chain, not only in Canada, in the US, and Mexico, but among the three partners to make us achieve fully our potential, our business potential, and global advantage. This is a small reminder that I am a strategic advisor to Global Advantage consulting firm. Anyway, I closed I'm earning a premium for this. Thank you.
I'm an optimist, Ambassador. Thank you for that. But I think what we're particularly optimistic about at the Council is the potential for Canada-Mexico bilateral trade and investment. For those of you who aren't familiar with Business Council, our membership is comprised of the CEOs of some of the leading and largest companies in Canada, including two of our event sponsors, the CEOs of Scotiabank and Air Canada. There are a number of Canadian CEOs who are extremely optimistic about how we can increase bilateral trade and investment between our two countries. And I think that all too often we think about North America as a trilateral partnership, but we need to focus more on the bilateral trade and investment ties between Canada and Mexico. And on that, I think that that not only is there a lot that we can do together, but there's a lot we can do together globally. And when we talk about high growth markets, whether in the Indo-Pacific or elsewhere, Canada and Mexico together, whether and Secretary Pompa said earlier today, I mean, one of the areas is technology, but specifically biotech, ag tech, med tech. I mean, these are areas where Canada and Mexico can work together to take on the world. And so I'm an optimist, Ambassador. I don't, not to discount the challenges. I
don't want to project myself as a pessimist. I'm just saying what I hear is very pessimist.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you.
Perfect. José, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, je ne parle pas français, parle espagnol, parle English. English also. And having said that, I think that we have a lot of opportunities because you have two types of Mexico. You have the one that is richer, that is close in the set of mind to the US and Canada, and you have the other, the pure people. And what I'm involved this year, my company, Computación en Acción Compaqui, we get to 40 years in the market on the 23rd of March. But I'm also involved in startups. We have, and that's the advantage, we have data. We have 1 million clients. We process with our system, the company's process, the payroll for 5 million people. We make each day from 30 to 40 electronic invoices for the government. And we are the biggest company for small SMEs in Mexico. So we have the data. Also, we have accounting systems. And I think that after the market fit, the second problem for a startup is financing. And the way to go with the financing is using this information because banks are more in the risk business than in the growing business. But if you have data using AI, you can build that. And the first stage, getting to the concept of this journey is to put the information in order. So there are a lot of small companies that they don't have arranged their numbers. And we are starting also to do journal entries automatically using artificial intelligence, but also they have the data lake. So I see a big opportunity, but there's also another opportunity. Don't think about on a small company to get a lot of resources getting to Mexico or Latin America. That's the name of one of our companies, Open LATAM, Open Latin America. But to get a partnership, that's the main reasons we are now here at Ottawa with a company, Jams, with the World Jam that is going to be here in June in Ottawa. And that's the main reasons I'm opening 4 companies to develop that from Canada, because I trust the company, the country. My daughter get here in 2000. I escort her to study English at Toronto. And my 2 sons study French. They are trilingual in Montreal. So I'm very committed. My youngest son study at the Vancouver Film School. So I think we have a big opportunity of getting involved in making business, making a bridge between Canada and Mexico, upside US, and getting to partnerships to go for the big markets, not only in Mexico, but using Mexico as a way to go to all the South and also Spain. I'm also an optimist, very optimistic people, but I think we need to put the resources, the training, the capabilities, and to make together that for both sides of the partnership.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add to the comments here. My role here is more dealing with the foreign direct investment side. So I deal with global companies all the time. If you talk about the cross-border investment, one of the major, factors that will impact investment both ways is always coming from the, regulation side. The general policy, for example, if you are investing in Canada, we have a general policy regulation on investment under Investing in Canada Act. So that's the baseline. That's applicable to all the industries. But there are also very specific industry-related regulations that could also impact any investment into the country or going out of the country and going to Mexico in the south as well. So those ones, for example, in the AI area, especially cutting-edge technology areas, you have to bear in mind regulations are always lagging behind, which means industries are developing faster than the regulations itself. So in our practice, Invest Ottawa, I see the previous panelists from Manage AI. Actually, we have programs trying to work with regulators in early stage, in the innovation side, so that we can not only help our investors, but also educate our regulators and policymakers at the same time, so that they can be more forward-looking in terms of investment attraction. So that's the additional comment I want to make to the general framework of policy influence and regulations in terms of cross-border investment and trade. Of course, last point is the USMCA, how you name it, the free trade agreement is always a favoring thing for all 3 countries to do business for investment, because even we are trying to attract investment outside of the whole North American, South American market from other markets like Europe, Asia Pacific. This favors us to attract certain investment into the country because we have this integrated trade regime here. So I have more points to share later for other questions, but I want to just quickly add to this. Thank you. Back to the moderator.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sophie. I think you even touched a little bit on the next question that I had next about what exactly the easier approaches or the lower hanging fruit that exists that could actually help drive investment and drive trade quickly and more productively. Is anyone able to comment a little bit on this?
Well, it's a very interesting point, and we've heard it on a couple of panels, is regulatory risk. And last year, one of our colleague partners, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, did a study using AI, interestingly, and it looked at the risk disclosures of the FP 500 going back a decade to see whether risks had changed, identified risks had changed. And most had remained somewhat stable, but public policy risk had increased by 29%. And that is, and Claudia mentioned it, I mean, there are the risk regulatory changes that when new governments come in, if they do a 180 degree on certain things, and when you have business leaders who are trying to plan out 10, 20 years ahead in terms of long-term investments, it's hard when you just don't know what that regulatory certainty and predictability is. So, you know, Canada and Mexico are fortunate not only to have the USMCA, we're also together in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Which allows for some of that certainty and predictability and reliability, which I think is a real advantage for us as we look at the bilateral relationship.
We did something about making our relations with Canada, because with my wife we founded the Alba Foundation, DAR, in English is KIP, and we make scholarships from 2008 to 2020, unfortunately because of the COVID situation. And we graduate 18 young people, not at the university level, because they will drop after that, only to learn English and French, first at winter, below 20 degrees centigrades, below zero, because I can talk 1,000 words, but one image is better than that. One film is better than 1,000 images, and one experience is better than 1,000 films. So you need to live what means to be Canadian. And you need to prepare for the winter, not only the winter of your company, the winter of life. And that's something that we don't have in Latin America. People, mostly, they don't make savings. So you need to make them financially independent. And the way to do that is that, and we, after that stop, we are starting again. And the way I think is a small visits, probably 5 weeks, with a partnership with universities here to take short programs, but also in an entrepreneurships with Mexican companies. And you will make masses for that. The original idea before the Pan American Games, when I was a minister of Jalisco, was to put here in Canada 500 people. 500 people training trilingual with a cultural environment that will be the change.
Coming back, I fully agree with what Jack said about the importance of regulations and harmonizing regulations to facilitate the exchanges. That's particularly relevant to the point I was trying to make earlier about data. You know, data, the interoperability of data. Well, to promote interoperability of and that's critical, by the way. You need to have the proper regulatory frameworks so that will facilitate it. So I would say I don't know if regulatory reform, mind you, is a low-hanging fruit. It's critical, but it's difficult to achieve. So it takes time. But doing that will facilitate this interoperability of data among Canada and Mexico, will facilitate also the development of common data spaces. It could be sector specific as it relates, as an example, to the supply chain, but you can have other sectors. We have an interesting experience that is taking place in Europe. Europe, at 27 countries, they are implementing at present a program of common data spaces between and fully with the full support of the 27 countries. So this is not, that's very interesting, and focusing on all strategic areas of the European Economic Union. So can we not do this in North America? We should be able to do it.
I agree. I see, Sophie, your thinking cap is on.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Alain, on that. I mean, speaking of low-hanging fruit, I'm also thinking about, like, if we are talking about investment attraction, let's if we focus on certain industries, we always have a global value chain. So in the AI specific area, we also have a global AI value chain. So the fundamental logics for foreign direct investment in any industry, you have to look at what drives the development, in terms of comparative advantages from each region. How can we pitch ourselves in that global value chain? So if we have a global AI value chain, then Canada, and Mexico definitely has its individual or respective advantages in that areas to address different challenges. For example, in Canada, I mean, we have a lot of good research, and like if you are looking at the top 10 researchers in AI, we have a whole bunch of them. We ranked very high on the academic, theoretic, and also in Ottawa particularly, applied AI is our strongest area in terms of capabilities. But if you look at Mexico, speaking of data, like for people who understand how AI model is trained, you need a lot of data points. You need a tremendous data point. I mean, in Canada, we don't have that much population, let's face it. Like if you want to actually collect a lot of data points, and there are a lot of actually in this whole value chain, there are a lot of labor intensive and also time intensive things you need to do in AI data model training, which means you have to mark all the data points to a degree. So to that point, I mean, you can see how we can wisely and strategically identify the sweet spot. And I call those sweet spots as the low-hanging fruit areas for each country to pursue. And I hope that echoes to all the panelists said. Back
Perfect.
to the moderator.
Thank you, Sophie. And I guess we might as well just jump right into it and ask how Mexican companies can come into Canada and how Canadian companies can go into Mexico. What does expansion look like? Sophie, I know that you've had over 10 years of attracting foreign direct investment. What exactly could you provide on what attracting FDI looks like? What opportunities do Mexican tech companies have to come into to Canada, and what resources can be utilized?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. So again, I'm a big fan of framework thinking. So if you look at foreign direct investment attraction, there are two fundamental aspects of this. If you are looking at the economic perspective, there are many factors that could impact how effectively we attract foreign direct investment. These are all rooted from the comparative advantages we have in the region. So for example, the cost of a business, the availability of talent, and also the general business climate and the quality of life. Those ranked very high in terms of attracting foreign direct investment into the region. Take Ottawa, for example. We actually ranked the highest in terms of technology talent concentrations in whole North America, even surpassed Silicon Valley. Well, a lot of people don't know that. So that's our biggest advantages in this, foreign direct investment attraction field. And also in terms of cost of doing business, if you compare all the top 5 cities in Canada, take Ottawa, for example, again, we actually ranked the lowest in terms of doing business in Canada cost comparing to other bigger cities in Canada. So again, this gave people advantages to consider Ottawa as the location to do investment. And finally, I mean, to my Canadian friends here, Ottawa is a great city to live in, and we have very good quality of life, even though we have winters like this. But for people who love winter, like winter sports, it's a golden spot for winter sports. So those are all good reasons for people to consider, foreign direct investment into Canada. And then the second biggest bucket, I would say, perspective is from the political side. For example, we already talked about regulations, right? There are general regulations about investment attraction because every country has its own investor in whatever country act to define specifically what needs to be reviewed, the threshold of investment amounts, and how those are related to national security, blah, blah, blah. So the list goes on. And there are second layer of regulations and policies also related to industry-specific ones. So in certain industries, opportunities are great, when the barriers of entry are low, and we open it up for more companies from foreign countries to participate in. But there are certain industries that has a high bar and more regulations and more complicated, and probably that's less encouraging for certain companies to consider. And lastly, I mean, in this political perspective, tax regimes, tax incentives also play a big role. For example, in Ottawa specifically and in Canada overall, we have great advantage of attracting R&D and innovation-driven companies because we have very generous SRED tax credit. This applies to any companies, for example, from Mexico. If they are doing technologies, in the AI area, they want to do R&D here in Canada. They have great advantages here because they can tap into a lot of innovation funding we have here. We have a lot of government-related program to encourage innovation, and also we have this generous tax incentives to encourage them to hire the engineers, the researchers here. We see a lot of researchers today. So those will all add to this whole, pack of factors, I would say, that can help us do a better job to attract investment. I would pause here to let other people jump in.
About 2 years ago, we supported, when our respective governments launched the Canada-Mexico or Mexico-Canada high-level economic dialogue. And we were invited, along with our counterparts at the Consejo Mexicano de Negocios, to put some thoughts together on what would help improve and strengthen bilateral investment. And among the recommendations we made, very much as has been said, prioritizing some key industries, obviously tech, AI, but also advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, quantum computers. Second one was strengthening workforce or streamlining workforce mobility, skills accreditation, and allowing companies with operations on both sides of the border to be able to move employees back and forth. Third one, and I mention it because the secretary is here, we can't just think of Canada and Mexico as two entities. We have 10 provinces, 3 territories in Canada. There are, as was said earlier, 31 states plus Mexico City and the federal. The fact that Jalisco has come up is very different than Nuevo León, very different than Tabasco, very different than Quintana. So we have to think about, we talk about the regional competitive advantages, even within Mexico. I don't know that, and I have to admit, before I start working on it, I didn't appreciate the distinction, the differences. But when you go to Guadalajara, when you go to Monterrey, when you go to Mexico City, these are very different with enormous strengths and opportunities. And I think that's a part, we can't just think of it as a one-to-one. It's really and there's so many opportunities at the state level in Mexico, as particularly Jalisco.
Just to everything that was said, I support and so I'm not going to. But the issue is also, of course, market accessibility. And there, I like the point that you made, the last point. We should not focus necessarily on countries, but on regions, on local markets, because after all, it's like politics. Business is also local. And of course, various places have different qualities about creating foreign investment. So that's an assessment that has been done by each company, each CEO, each business development officer. And the critical point that you made the reference to it's the regulatory framework. So that's critical. The rule of law, regulatory framework, and a certain stability there, and predictability, and also transparency. I mean, these are critical factors.
To make a big thing, you need to start dreaming. When I was at Singularity University, you need at the executive program, you need to put a moonshot. The moonshot in Singularity is that what you are going to do to change 1 million lives. At the level of my company, we have done that, more than 1 million people. But my new dream, my bet is here connected with Canada, Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto. And it means that if you retire, you die. So I need to move. I'm getting to my 70-year-old, 51 years working. And what I'm doing now is making the connections. We have the market. We have the clients. We are betting on new technology. It's open source. And with open source, you can go wherever. The problem, not only in Mexico, but in Colombia, Peru, is that you have what is called localization. And it's better for companies in Canada, US, or even Europe, that you deal with a Canadian company. What we are doing, we are making to be Canadian. So we are in the law and the transparency, and we can, from Canada, do business with also the other part of the business in Mexico. And it will be the way to go most easily, more we can access also more budget, more capital funds. And the way to manage that is to talk with universities, but also talk with partnerships in Mexico, like in Silicon Valley they do with SB Links. For example, they make businessmen to go for 1 week to Silicon Valley. I invite the audience to start looking and making small missions with people, with their family owner, the young people of that family, to come here to Canada in an organized way. We have a direct flight from Puerto Vallarta. You can start with 2 days or 3 days in Vallarta, talking about the advantage here in Canada, and taking the direct flight from Puerto Vallarta here to Ottawa. Later on, show what you have here and prepare a budget. I'll act like myself, a salesman. I'm a salesman.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That was a lot to unpack. Thank you for commenting more on, collaborating as well with post-secondary institutions, and how I wish we had the time to move in depth and talk more in depth about how we can collaborate on that front. But I do know we have like 3 minutes left. 2 minutes, okay. So I'll just end off with the last question. Perhaps maybe like 30 seconds to a minute for each and every panelist. But considering everything that we've spoken about today, what is one insight or inspiration or even a challenge you would hope today's attendees and the audience would walk away with? What can we also put into action?
Maybe I go first. We talked a lot about the economic factors, political factors, regulation factors. But I actually want to mention one thing we haven't talked about is the business-friendly, system for any investors and people doing trade. How important it is to create that business-friendly, services. For example, my team, we actually have a global runway program to provide one-stop shop services for all the investors coming in town. And that's particularly important because given everything the same, like comparative advantages, climate, cost, like the list goes on for innovation, availability of talent. It's people day to day. Like at the end of the day, it's who you are dealing with and who you are talking with. You need to make them feel at home whenever they do global business, whenever they come to your market. So I think there is nothing more to emphasize how important to offer that excellence in service, especially from the government agencies' perspective, because I heard it from other previous panelists from MindBridge AI. They talked about Invest Ottawa. We actually would love to, offer that services to companies coming from Mexico and or the global world coming to Ottawa to do business. So I pause here. So excellence service is really something for everybody as ongoing homework for us going forward.
Alain?
I will be very brief. Be very brief. I've learned so much, and there is so much about innovation and so on. What we need, and we could do together, by the way, is an innovation mapping of capacities and stakeholders in the innovation sector between Canada and Mexico, and why not the US? That's manageable. This mapping connections.
I would just end with, and it's the title of another paper that we did, my colleague Trevor Neiman, Economic Security is National Security. As Canada and Mexico become increasingly integrated in terms of our financial, energy, telecommunications networks, companies like Scotiabank, TC Energy, Canadian Pacific, Kansas City Southern is a railway network now that goes from Canada straight through Mexico. Businesses are increasingly on the front lines of cyber attacks. We're seeing it. The more we can do together to ensure the reliability not only of supply chains but those critical infrastructure networks, the better. And that's something that Canada and Mexico can absolutely do together.
Thanks, Jack.
It's not B2B, B2C, or B2C. It's P2P, people to people. Make your connections, your business, friendships for life, and enjoy life and being happy.
Thank you. If you ever need advice to expand your company, you know who to call. I think we're at the end of our panel. But thank you again to this lovely esteemed panel. And I think I'm going to head it over and jump to Gina. Thank you all.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists and our love.